I've taken a lot of photos that just didn't turn out the way I wanted to. Blurry, noisy, low resolution, and usually once an image gets to that point, you just leave it alone. But tools like this are starting to change that. So I've been testing a software called Aiarty Image Enhancer from Aiarty, and it's built around upscaling, denoising, and recovering detail from images that aren't in great condition to begin with. And instead of just sharpening a photo, it tries to rebuild detail using different AI models depending on what you're working with. And at the same time, you've still got your standard adjustment controls like exposure, contrast, white balance, and color, which are really the foundation of any editing workflow. So it's not just about running an AI process here. You can actually work on the image properly inside the software as well. Now, normally I don't structure my videos like this, but there's a lot going on here. So I'm just gonna go through what I liked and the things that I didn't like point by point, just to give you a better understanding of what this software is and what it can and can't do. So what this is really trying to do is go beyond just sharpening. Instead of just boosting edges, it's trying to add back detail that wasn't really there to begin with. And that can make a noticeable difference depending on the image. And having a few different models to choose from, it really helps because not every image responds the same way. The workflow is very simple. You bring in your image, you choose an AI model, and then you process it. You don't need to dig through menus just to get started. The settings are clean and easy to move through. There's no clutter and everything feels like it's where it's supposed to be. Now there's also a hardware compatibility check built in, which is a really useful touch. It shows what your system can handle before you start pushing things too far. And so you got all of these standard sliders here as well. Exposure, contrast, color, and that matters because those are still the backbone of editing. The AI helps, but it doesn't replace that. Since everything is built into one place, you don't need to jump into another program just to finish your image. You can go from start to finish right here in the software. And there's also a restore color mode, which I really like, which helps bring back things back if AI shifts tones too much. It's a small feature, but it solves a real problem. So upscaling is surprisingly fast, and in some cases going from lower resolution to something much higher happens almost instantly. You can also choose between CPU and GPU processing depending on your setup, which gives you more control. And there's also the tile system where you can adjust how the image is processed in segments. Higher values use more VRAM, but it can also improve performance. And when it comes to exporting, you've also got control over output DPI, which is useful if you're doing any kind of print work. It goes up to 1000 DPI if you need it. And there's also an SDR and HDR option, which can add more contrast and depth. It's not something I'd use all the time, and you do need an HDR monitor to really take advantage of it, but it's there if you need it. Now here's another feature I really like. You can also clear temporary files when you exit the software, which helps keep things clean over time. And another thing this company does really well is they provide a detailed user guide along with extra test images and tutorials. It's useful to go through, but at some point you'll just want to start using the software yourself. And just to mention, this software has been featured on platforms like Petapixel and F-Stoppers, and the company has been around since 2006, so it's not something new or untested. So up until this point, I've mainly been testing it with the images included in the software. But to get a better idea of how it actually performs, I also tested it on some of my own images. On the first image, using the more detailed model with 2-pass processing, it actually did a really nice job. It brought out detail in the eyebrows, eyelashes, iris, and the lips, but kept everything subtle. It doesn't feel overprocessed. It just feels like the image has been refined a bit, which is exactly what you want. Now moving on to the second image. The second image is where things start to fall apart a bit. This one is more challenging. The subject is slightly turned, there is more negative space, and the left side of the face is softer and a bit out of focus. So it's not a bad image, just a more complex one. It's shot with intent. It's intended to be like this. Now, when I turn on face restoration here, it completely broke the image. It didn't just miss slightly, it made things look unnatural. The face started to look distorted and almost something like out of a horror film. I tried different modes like rebuild, fidelity, and overlay options, but none of them really worked. So in this case, face restoration just isn't usable. So I turned that off and used the more detailed GAN V2 model with 2-pass processing, just to see what we can do with this image here. And even there, it struggled. I don't really know why, but instead of recovering detail, it actually made parts of the image worse. The left eye didn't improve, and details and the things like the headdress and the earrings actually got reduced. The only thing it handled fairly well here was the skin. It smoothed things out a bit, but overall, this one was definitely a miss. Now the third image was intentionally softer, with the focus on the earrings rather than the face. The subject is more front-facing, so the software recognizes the face better. But once you turn on face restoration, it still changes the image too much. It removes detail from important elements, it flattens the skin tones, and even starts altering facial features. Turning it off and using GAN V2 gives a slightly better result, but still not really an improvement. And in fact, I'm getting more usable details from the original image. Now, to be fair, this is a more difficult image, but it's also the kind of situation where you'd expect tools like this to help. So for this one, it just didn't quite get there either. The last image is where it works really well again. With the eyes in focus and the image already strong, both GAN V2 and V3 bring out small details in a very subtle and controlled way. Skin tones stay natural and nothing gets overdone, and everything just feels balanced, so this one I really like. And this is where I can actually see myself using it. Not to fix a bad image, but to push a good one just a little bit further, from a 9 out of 10 to a 10 out of 10. Now, after going through these images, that's where a few limitations start to show up. Talking about performance and responsiveness, one thing I did notice is how the sliders behave at higher resolutions. Up to around 4K, everything feels smooth and responsive, but once you move up to 8K, there's a bit of a delay before the image updates. Now, to be fair, working at 8K isn't something most people are doing all the time, but it does show that as you push the resolution higher, you start to lose that real-time feedback a bit. What's interesting though is that the upscaling itself is very fast, but interacting with the image at that level slows things down slightly. So it's not really a deal breaker, just something to be aware of. And here's another issue I ran into. So if you're running a dual monitor setup, this is something to keep in mind. The software works fine when you open it on one screen, but if you drag it between monitors, especially between one that's horizontal and one that's vertical, it can break the interface. So you end up having to close it and reopen it on the screen if you want to use it again. It's not a huge issue, but it does interrupt your workflow a bit. Zooming is also limited here. You can zoom in and out, but only until the image hits the edges of the canvas. So you can't zoom out beyond that point to get a wider overview like you can in something like Photoshop. Now, this is really important to me, and I hope this can be fixed with software updates. Now, looking at the different output qualities, the newer GAN V3 model isn't always actually better than the V2. And in some cases, the V2 gives a more natural result, so I ended up using that more. So one major thing that's missing for me here, or at least it's not very clear, is denoising. Denoising is a pretty important part of any editing workflow, especially if you're shooting at higher ISO. And right now, it's not very obvious where that sits in the software. There's no dedicated control for it in the main sliders, and I do think this is something that should have its own section, just to make it easier to work with. Now, if you dig a bit deeper, there is some functionality tied to the AI models. There's a model called Real Photo V3, which is supposed to handle things like de-blurring and denoising, but for my testing, it's not really doing that. I tested this on an image shot at ISO 6400, which honestly isn't that extreme with modern cameras, and instead of reducing noise, it actually introduced more noise, more artifacts, and more color noise into the image. Even when switching between the models like the GAN V2 and the V3, I'm still not seeing any proper noise reduction. There's no real smoothing, no cleanup. nothing that you would expect from a denoise feature. And just to put that in perspective, if you compare it to something like DxO Pure Raw, which is very strong in this area, you can take extremely noisy images and make them usable again. Here, that's just not happening right now. So this is definitely an area that needs more work, both in terms of how it's presented in the software and how it actually performs. But I wasn't quite ready to let this go yet because something just felt off. So I took a second look at my image here of Radagast and I found the culprit. We have this box right here that restores color. When it's ticked in, all these artifacts and color noise is introduced. If you untick that box, the software actually does a pretty solid job of removing noise and bringing back detail. But I feel that it is a little bit misleading because if I look at one of the sample images that's included here, let's take a look at this tiger here. The before image clearly shows that it's out of focus, really grainy, and it looks bad. But if I use the more detailed GON V2 and I have the restore color ticked in, it doesn't introduce any artifacts or any noise like it does with Radagast. Now, if I untick this, it gets more bleached, but if I tick it in, it brings back those original orange colors of the tiger, and there's no artifacting and no color noise. So what's really going on here? I don't know. But if you're using the software and you want to get rid of that noise and you're using one of your original images, make sure that this box is not ticked in. Talking about content and exporting the images, the sample images that's included with the software feels very AI heavy and not very realistic. You can download better examples from their site, but it would be nice to have those included from the start. So overall, I think this is a pretty capable piece of software. But it's also one of those tools where you start to notice that some things it does really, really well and other things not so much. And that's okay because this is clearly a software that's trying to push boundaries and do something a bit different. For my own use, I wouldn't rely on it for everything, but in the right situation, it fits in really well. For me personally, this is more of a complementary tool. If I've got an image that's already in a good place and I just want to take it from maybe a 9 out of 10 to a 10 out of 10, that's where something like this starts to make sense. Used in a subtle way, it can bring out extra details and refine an image without changing it too much. So it's not about replacing your workflow, it's about adding to it. And I think that's where tools like this become interesting, when you start using them with intention. Well, all right, that's it for this one. Let me know what you think, and I'll catch you in the next one.